biggest nightmare on Surrogacy Street is, could the surrogate have the right to take my child? If you've ever wondered if that's possible in your scenario, or if that could happen, period, stick around for this video. What's up? I'm Corlandos Scott, a surrogacy attorney in Los Angeles, and my entire practice revolves around helping people grow their family through assisted reproductive technologies like surrogacy. And one of the main parts of my job is to make sure that we address the question of, could the surrogate take my baby? So in this video, we're going to cover a few things. The purpose of a surrogacy contract, when a surrogate could possibly take the child, the intent of surrogacy, and how to avoid this ever being a question in your surrogacy journey. Let's jump right in. So, can the surrogate take my baby? This is probably one of the most common questions that I get from potential clients who aren't quite sure whether or not they want to go through the surrogacy process. And it's a great question, because why would you undertake such a huge investment of time, energy, and finances only to end up not being able to take your baby home with you? So it's an amazing question, and we have to get to the bottom of it so that you don't run into this question in your surrogacy journey. At the foundation of the surrogacy process is the surrogacy contract. This contract should detail every piece of the responsibilities and rights of both the surrogate and the intended parents. And one of the main principles of the contract is to make sure that we're very clear on who is the parent and who is not the parent. In fact, that's why you'll see many professionals in the assisted reproduction world shy away from using the phrase surrogate mother. Or we make sure that most of the arrangements that we put together are gestational surrogacy arrangements where the surrogate is not genetically related to the child. The reason why we do this is because we want to trim down any misconception that could possibly arise that the surrogate is in any way the rightful parent of the child to be born. So that surrogacy contract goes to great lengths to spell out the intent of both parties, which is that the intended parents or hopeful parents are the rightful, legal, sole parents of the child, and the surrogate is simply gestating and carrying the child to birth. In fact, that's why hopeful parents in this world are referred to as intended parents. So let's talk about when a surrogate could possibly get custody to your child. Well, I hinted at it earlier, but we try to make sure that nowadays most of the arrangements that we put together, especially in my office, are gestational surrogacy arrangements, where the surrogate is not also the egg donor, so she has no genetic connection to the child. However, there are still people who do what we call traditional surrogacy arrangements, where the surrogate is also the person who donates her eggs for the couple to create embryos to have the baby. Now, this isn't an absolute. Even when a surrogate is also the egg donor, the contract's job is to detail what the intent of that egg donation is. And when we spell out that the intent of the egg donation is for the surrogate to donate her eggs to the intended parents for the purposes of creating an embryo, to then turn around and transfer back to her uterus, then we can be confident that there is a very clear line between surrogate and rightful legal parent. However, the line is much muddier than it would be if the surrogate was not the egg donor. In fact, this is one of those times where you want to make sure of the law in the state that you're engaging in surrogacy, because some states have laws on the books concerning parental rights depending on where the gametes originate. Gametes, just a fancy medical term for reproductive stuff, sperm and eggs. So to get to the bottom of this, we really have to look at what is the intent of surrogacy, because after all, we call the rightful parents the intended parents, and there's a reason for that. The intent of a contract is really what governs the interpretation of that contract. So one of the things the court looks at when it's trying to validate or determine what a contract means is, what was the intent of the parties that entered into the contract? So in surrogacy, the intent is that there will be a woman who will carry a fetus to term, deliver the child to give to another couple or individual, for that couple or individual to be considered the parents of that child. So we have to make sure that even in an arrangement where the surrogate is also the egg donor, that the intent is super clear in all of the contracts and in all of the court documents that will be filed for parental rights. So it's really important to make sure that you cross all your T's and dot your I's, and that's why I scream from the mountaintops, before you start your assisted reproduction process, make sure you have a solid team around you who can help you navigate the nuances of the process. Why do I say that? Well, there was a case a few years back in the early 2000s in Pennsylvania where a surrogate gave birth to a baby on behalf of a set of intended parents. Well, one of the things that went wrong in this process was that the surrogate challenged the paternity. The surrogate challenged the parental rights of the intended parents. And here's how she did it. She wasn't happy with how the intended parents were treating the baby after the delivery, and so she called it into question. How was she able to do that? Well, somehow, even though the parties had entered into an agreement, even though the parties had been matched by an agency, even though the parties had undergone IVF and that the egg and the sperm belonged to the intended parents, the intended mother somehow didn't sign the surrogacy contract. I'm not sure how in the world, with all the help they had around, they let that happen, but that was the case, and that was one of the deciding factors for the court giving custody of the baby to the surrogate. It based it on the intended parents' behavior after the birth, along with the fact that there was no record of the intended mother being on the surrogacy contract. So it's so important that you make sure that your team around you knows exactly how to handle surrogacy in the state where you're undertaking surrogacy, so that you don't end up with a dream turned nightmare. Before I jump into how to avoid this in your journey, make sure you go check out my video on what type of attorney do you need for the surrogacy process. So before we get out of here, let's talk about some simple ways so that you can make sure to avoid this being a question in your surrogacy journey. First of all, make sure you're comfortable and you're knowledgeable about the laws in the state where you're going to undertake surrogacy. You can definitely talk to your agency, or you can enlist the help of an attorney to help you from the very beginning. But you want to make sure it's legal where you're from or legal where you're going to do it, and make sure you know what the laws say about how to be declared the rightful parent of a child born through surrogacy. The other thing is to make sure to take painstaking care with regards to the contract that's drafted between you and your surrogate. This is not a time to leave anything to chance. So make sure that you're working with a knowledgeable professional who can walk you through exactly what needs to be in that document, who needs to sign that document, how they need to sign that document, because in some states it must be notarized, and exactly everything that goes into the legal process. If you cover these bases, you'll be well on your way to making sure that it's never brought into question whether you're the legal parent of the beautiful child that you hope to take home from the hospital. If you're looking to embark on your own surrogacy journey, make sure you click the link below and get my free stress-free surrogacy training, where I walk you through the case studies that are presented from previous clients of mine who have run up against the same things that you're likely to encounter, and you can know from the very beginning how to avoid the pitfalls and the heartaches that could come with not doing things the right way. You can grow your family through surrogacy without losing sleep, time, or money. Click below and get the stress-free surrogacy training.